Welcome to day 2 of the Protection of Civilians Conference organized by PAX here from The Hague in the Netherlands. My name is Wilbert van der Zeijden and I'm the team coordinator for the PAX team working on protection of civilians. Before I introduce today's program, I would like to sort of sketch the situation I am in a little bit, especially for our viewers at home or online. We're very lucky that despite the new COVID regulations, we have quite a few of the speakers of our program physically here with us. So I'm sitting, you can only see me now, but I'm actually sitting in quite a big room with about, sort of scanning the room, I would say maybe 30 to 40 participants. Some of them speakers, but also some of them people still joining us today or for the whole 3 days of this conference. So welcome to people here in the room, but also welcome to you at home. For a hybrid event, what we're trying to strike today is a balance between online participants, but also participants here in the room in your engagement in the sessions of today. Today we will discuss how civilians, when harmed during conflict, can hold perpetrators to account, or to be honest, often cannot hold perpetrators to account. To those of you who joined our 2020 conference, you may recall that we spent quite a lot of time speaking about civilian harm last year. More specifically, we tried to convince our audience that we believe that there should be a broader conceptualization of civilian harm, not only looking at direct civilian harm, civilian casualties, wounded, dead, but also including indirect civilian harm, longer-term civilian harm, and things like that. And looking back at these sessions a year ago, I would say that these were actually a starting point for a lot of the work that we did as a team over the past 12 years. In June, and you may have noticed this, we published a big orange book called On Civilian Harm. And it's a book that actually goes into detail into 13 very specific cases, very specific examples of civilian harm, very diverse. And for each of the cases, we look at who exactly did harm and why, what were their intentions, who are the people that were harmed, but also what were the methods and the tools and the mechanics that led to harm. If you want a copy of the book online, you can get it on our website, www.protectionofcivilians.org, or give us a mail and we may still be able to send you a very rare copy by now if you're really excited about the book. In October, we also practiced how do you actually plan for civilian harm in military missions? How do you plan and how do you operationalize civilian harm tracking and mitigation in missions? With an audience of almost 60 military and non-military participants, we really practiced in how in an urban setting civilian harm plays a big role in your success or failure rates for a military mission. Hosted by one German-Netherlands course, and facilitated by David Kilcullen and his team at Cordillera Applications Group, and together with Stimson Center, we organized this event in Münster, Germany. We also, throughout the year, developed a podcast series, a very popular thing to do, I know, in COVID times, together with our friends at the Center for Civilians in Conflict, or CIVIC, a podcast series that really puts the voices of civilians at the center of these topics that have to do with civilian harm and reverberating effects. Throughout 2021, we also had extensive discussions with the Dutch Ministry of Defense, with a group of Dutch NGOs and international NGOs actually. We in total had 6 sessions where we discussed civilian harm, but also harm mitigation, but also transparency and accountability issues surrounding that. And last but certainly not least, and leading back to the program of today, we together with Al-Ghad, our partners in Iraq, but also with the University Utrecht, throughout 2021, we did research in Hawija on the ground with our local partners on the perceptions of civilians about what happened in 2015 when a large part of Hawija was destroyed by a Dutch F-16 bomb. But also how what happened back then in 2015 to this day affects the lives of civilians in Hawija. Throughout all these efforts, the TTX, the writing of the book, the research in Hawija, one of the central themes that kept coming up, is of course accountability. What are the means that civilians have to hold their perpetrators to account? And for us at PAX, I would say, as a peace organization, it is not so much the legal argument that we're taking as a starting point. So the legal argument as in, what is the right of this civilian? Or what is the responsibility of this actor harming a civilian? It is also not per se a political or even a moral issue for us so much, or at least not at a starting point. For us, it really boils down to a set of very practical, individual questions. If you are a civilian being harmed in conflict, in that complex and volatile context, where do you physically go? What can you physically do to, first of all, make known that you are harmed? To get acknowledgement for the fact that you are being harmed. Which building or which online portal can you go to find information about who bombed your house or who killed your loved one? But also, where can you go to find compensation if you believe that the perpetrator should give you compensation for the loss or the damages that you have endured as a consequence? And this will also be the common thread in our discussions today. This very physical, practical element of civilian harm and accountability. In the morning, we're honored to have here with us the Mayor of Hawija, Sabhan Khalaf Ali, and also Mr. Tofan Abdulwahhab Awad, the Director of Al-Ghad League for Women and Childcare. And they will share with us how, from their perspective, but also the perspective of their communities, the events of 2015 unfolded and still affect civilian life in Hawija till today. Starting at 11:30, we will hear from Saba Azeem, my colleague from PAX, and from Lauren Gould from the University of Utrecht, and Mohammed Abdul Karim Khattar from Al-Ghad League for Women and Childcare. And they will tell us about the research that they have been doing this past year in Hawija. The research is not yet ready to be published, but they couldn't resist our demand for them to at least share some of their findings and recommendations today with us. And we're very happy that they caved into that pressure. After lunch, we will flip the perspective quite a bit and talk about some of the experiments that there have been, or attempts that there have been, of military missions to create better forms and shapes for accountability for civilians. And we'll be joined by Abdullahi Hassan from Amnesty International, Chris Woods from Air Wars, and Sar Muhammad Ali from the Center for Civilians in Conflict. And they will sort of give us the run-through of the successes, but also the failures of these attempts. And finally, we end the day with a session specifically on Afghanistan, where Patricia Gosman from Human Rights Watch, Fawzia Eshani from the Council of National Reconciliation in Afghanistan, and Eva Messingham from the University of Queensland, Australia, will talk us through the incredible events of the past couple of weeks, of course, in Afghanistan with the collapse of the government and the takeover by the Taliban, but also what that spells for accountability for civilians and the opportunities for civilians in Afghanistan to hold their perpetrators of violence to account. Looking at the clock, I realize I must wrap up my introduction, but I still have a couple of household notes to run through with you. And I also realize now that I forgot totally to click my clicker and show you the different slides, but they're not too important. You can read the housekeeping notes here yourself, but let me point out a couple that I think are of particular importance. Please check all the bios of the speakers on the online platform that we have created for this conference, and that you already know because you've registered there and you're basically in this platform now watching this if you're not here with us. But also, please take a good look at the program for today, because we had to squeeze it because of the new COVID rules. We have to be out of this building before 5, so we had to squeeze the program a little bit. So sessions may start, for example, like a quarter of an hour earlier, and it will be a pity if you miss the beginning of a session, of course. Please also use the matchmaker function that we have on the platform, where you can use to meet and hook up with other participants and maybe discuss your common interests in this conference. Also use the library function. We have built an extensive library of resources for all 3 days and all the topics that we're discussing in those 3 days. If you encounter problems, please know that there is a function of communicating directly with the technical team. Online, there's a drop-down menu, and if you click that, you can directly contact the technical team, and they may be able to help you solve your problem. Please also post about this event and about the sessions on social media. And on the slide, I think you can, the slide's gone now. But on the slide, you can see what hashtags we want you to use so that we can all see what we're posting about the event. And then I think we'll have a short break for everybody at home to get a cup of coffee. People in the room here, please stay where you are, or it will be too late. And then we're ready to go over to my colleague Saba, Azeem, for the first session after the break. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to those who are joining us in person, those joining us in live, those who just joined us, and those who've been joining us since yesterday as well. I welcome you to the first session of today. My name is Saba Azeem, and I work with the Protection of Civilians team here at PAX for Peace. And I'm very happy that we have two extremely distinguished guests who accepted our offer to be here and to speak. Mr. Sabhan Khalaf Ali, the Mayor of Hawija, and Mr. Tofan Abdulwahhab Awad, the General Director of our esteemed Iraqi partner, Al-Ghad League for Women and Child Care. The theme of the day, as Wilbert has already discussed, is accountability. And how do civilians actually hold their perpetrators to account, and what mechanisms are there? Of course, we're not discussing the legal discourse, but more so that what mechanisms are there. Just to introduce you to a little bit, we only knew about Havida as being one of the last main cities which was besieged and under occupation by ISIS back in Iraq back in 2017. However, the human suffering that was caused by ISIS was extended further by the coalition airstrikes, as one of the civilians we talked to in Havida said, if we went out, ISIS killed us. If we stayed in, the coalition bombed us. So that shows that the suffering was extended beyond the layers that we could imagine. And in this case, of course, we're talking about the case that we've brought forth, especially this morning. We're talking about the Dutch airstrike, which targeted an ISIS munitions factory in the industrial neighborhood of Havida on the night of the 2nd and 3rd of June 2015. And by a very conservative estimate, it killed 70 civilians. However, it only came to public light 4.5 years later, in October 2019, thanks to the efforts of a lot of investigative journalists. We've also heard the mayor allude to these frustrations last night in the news at 8 p.m. If any of you watched the Dutch news. We've also seen many people write about it, from an academic point of view, journalistic point of view, practitioners, policymakers. However, I think it is time that we directly hear from the civilians and those who represent the civilians discuss what happened that fateful night. Joining us today, as I already mentioned, we have the Mayor of Hawija, Mr. Sabhan Khalaf Ali. He's been the mayor of Havida since 2003, and he was, of course, elected by the Havida District Council. In his role, he cooperates with numerous international and national NGOs to provide services to vulnerable civilians in Havida, especially those who have been impacted directly by conflict. He's also contributed to enabling humanitarian organizations and donors to access Havida District, especially after liberation in 2017. He's headed the Committee for Returning of Displaced Persons in Havida, and this committee has contributed to an estimated 95% of previously displaced persons from Havida to already return to their original area of origin. Before assuming the role of the Mayor of Havida, Ustaz Sabhan was the director of Said Dakil Sub-District of Tikar Governorate in 2002. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration as well as a law degree from the University of Mosul. Joining Mr. Sabhan is Mr. Tofan Abdulwahhab Awad, who is the General Director and founder of our partner, the Iraqi League for Women and Child Care, an Iraqi NGO which was established in 2004. Prior to taking on the role of the General Director of Al-Ghad, Mr. Tofan has held various positions, such as the Head of Migration and Displacement Directorate in Diyala, the Head of the Iraqi General Assembly of the Human Rights, Deputy Director of the Diyala Provincial Council, the Head of Migration and Displacement Directorate in Baghdad, and was also the representative of the Ministry of Displacement and Migration in 2012. In his role as the General Director of Al-Ghad, he has also been working with many UN agencies, international NGOs, and donor agencies to support civilians in need. In recognition of his efforts, he was elected by Iraqi organizations as the Ambassador of Humanity in Iraq in 2020. Originally also hailing from Havida district in Kirkuk, Tofan has a bachelor's degree in social sciences as well as a degree in law. Before we delve into this Q&A session and have both these esteemed gentlemen describe what happened, we want to show you a video of the industrial district of the morning after the bombing. I would also like to share with you that getting such evidence, such documentation from Hawija is especially challenging because cell phones were banned by ISIS, and those who were in possession of cell phones would be killed by ISIS. So here's a short video, and then we will start the interview.
خراب عام أرض الحويجة شلع
لا ما ادري والله بخير مع لقى شيء جوابك صار
17 طن تي ان تي
وين عنده سيارات
والله ابو انس وين الفقير وين الفقير.
Of course, pictures are worth 1,000 words, so we wanted to show that rather gruesome visual to also share with you the destruction that happened, the destruction that we've only talked about academically, we've talked about from a journalistic point of view. And now I will start the discussion. Ustaz Sabhan, my first question is to you, and again, thank you very much for joining us. We've seen the video of the day after. Can you describe in your own words what happened that night?
Good morning, everyone. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to PAX for the efforts they are exerting to serve the people of Hawija, especially when it comes to the Dutch attack. And I would like to thank them for inviting us to attend this conference. And I would like to thank them for organizing meetings with some of Dutch officials in order to provide a clear image about what happened in this incident. As a matter of fact, about the size or the scope of casualties, there was no accurate estimate of the number of casualties, and this has its own reasons. Among these reasons, some of the families that were in the incident had already come from other governorates in order to try to go to Kirkuk as a safe zone. And it was difficult to find these people after the city was liberated. So it was difficult to reach them and to listen to what they have to say. The other reason is that a part of these people do not trust the work of organizations because they see how some of these organizations operate in the region. The description of this night, it is impossible to find words that would describe accurately the repercussions and the things that the people felt on that night. However, according to the description of the people and simply as they said it, it was similar to the Hiroshima bomb. It was a horrible explosion. And most people who were present in the city has seen and witnessed this incident. And most people, or all the people, normally sleep on the roofs in this period of time because of the heat and because of the lack of electricity. And this incident happened at midnight. So imagine the scope of losses when people are not sheltered like this. Also knowing that a large number of people in the center of the governorate of Kirkuk and other areas of the governorate have felt also this explosion, despite the far distance that can be estimated to 70 kilometers from the city of Hawija. So when such an explosion happens, how do you think it would affect the people surrounding it? More than 70 people lost their lives because of this explosion, and approximately 500 people were injured physically and mentally. The industrial neighborhood was destroyed along with a large number of houses. Lots of also state institutions were destroyed or harmed. Unfortunately, we hear that the Dutch government did not hear about this incident until 4 years later. No governmental delegation went to visit the city and to check its situation or provide an official apology from the Dutch government to the civilian victims.
Thank you very much for this very detailed description. What you're describing is a lot of civilian harm, whereas what we've heard here was that the airstrike happened in the industrial neighborhood. Can you give us a little bit of context on where the industrial neighborhood actually was? Because you're also talking about a lot of destroyed houses, and what the industrial neighborhood actually meant for Hawija.
The industrial neighborhood was built according to old designs. It's located inside the city, and it's surrounded by a large number of residential neighborhoods. And when we talk about the industrial neighborhood, we don't only mean industrial buildings and places. We also talk about commercial shops, we talk about factories, we talk about car exhibitions, car point of sales.
Right. So what you mean to say, I think, is that like in Europe, we generally have a very designated separate industrial area and very separate residential areas. In Iraq, that's not the case.
بناء على التصاميم القديمة.
Yes, based on the old designs,
للمدينة بعد إنشاء
the
الحي
city
الصناعي.
expanded after the establishment
مما
of the
جعل الأحياء السكنية
industrial
محيطة بهذا
neighborhood. This made that the residential neighborhoods were surrounding this industrial area.
Thank you very much. Ustaz Tufan, as a representative of the Iraqi civil society, what humanitarian needs do you still see in Hawija?
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank at the outset PAX, which had given us the opportunity to be here today and to convey the humanitarian side and the humanitarian struggle that is present in our country and our city, especially in this area that was heavily affected. I would like to salute all the participants whose presence with us today represents support to the humanitarian side that we work on. And therefore, as a civil society organization in Iraq, we found that the most prominent humanitarian needs and most urgent humanitarian needs are, first, shelter or housing, because there are numerous displaced families who were not able to return and settle because their houses were completely destroyed. And as a result, these families And after the Iraqi government closed down camps, these families did not find any place to stay or shelter. Therefore, they were obliged to rent houses or apartments. And therefore, most of these families are from the very poor families who lost their property and their livelihoods. And this was what led them to force their children to leave school and leave education. And these children are now working, and they are doing child labor and jobs that are not in line with their not good for their ages, in order to provide livelihood and to be able to pay for rent. In addition, the working areas were not restored. And as the mayor said, the total destruction of the areas, of the livelihood areas, the commercial shops, the windmills, the factories, and the area surrounding the industrial neighborhood. So this led to a high level of unemployment. And this unemployment resulted in lots of other problems. These problems persist, and their repercussions also persist. Therefore, the rebuilding and rehabilitation of these of these commercial shops and the industrial neighborhoods is one of the solutions that we can have. And also, helping the harmed people because of the air attacks is necessary, especially for children and women who lost parts of their bodies. So they are in dire need for treatment and humanitarian assistance. Since lots of them are not receiving any treatment in Iraq, because of the lack of services, lack of health services in the region in general, and because they are from the most needy and the poorest, and they cannot afford any surgeries and any treatments. As a result, they need humanitarian assistance and intervention in order to help them. Moreover, we need help in abolishing unemployment or reducing unemployment through livelihood programs. We also found, through working with these cases, through field research that covered 119 families in cooperation with PAX, so we found out that there's a dire need for psychosocial support in order to treat the cases resulted by the war, especially among children and women.
Wow, those are extremely complex cases that you're describing and extremely complex needs, whereas Havida has been liberated now over 4 years ago. There are also over 100 NGOs working in Iraq and many more national NGOs. So how come these needs have not been addressed so far?
Yes, there are more than 100 NGOs in the province or in Iraq, but there is an understanding that is not very clear that Hawija has 4 districts. Therefore, there's a lot of damage because of the shelling during the liberation operation. Also, what ISIS destroyed during their presence between 2014 and 2017, which is the liberation, followed by the liberation operations. All this destruction reached all the aspects, the services, the education, the water, the treatment of used water, the electricity, also the social aspect of the life. This is why the presence of the NGOs is operating in other regions, not in the area that was actually attacked. Therefore, these NGOs, many of them work on simple treatment, while the strike caused mass destruction, as you saw. And these NGOs, when they see that there is a mass destruction that's beyond their capacities, beyond their programs, they can't do anything, they go to other areas in order to execute their programs.
Well, thank you very much. Just as a reminder to our online audience, please use the Slido function where you can also ask questions to our esteemed panelists. Because I'm only starting the discussion, we're hoping you will continue with it. And we'll also ask for, we also have a microphone here for those who are in person. And in a few minutes, when I finish my questions, we invite you to also ask questions. Ustaz Tufan, recently we've also heard that the Dutch government announced 2 projects in Hawija. How effective do you think these projects are in actually addressing the needs of the civilians of Hawija in a meaningful manner?
We heard also about this subject during our visit, but since we are part of a cluster of civil society organizations in Hawija, and we are working now with PAX to search for the research in the affected area, we did not witness any effect or impact for these projects offered by the Dutch government, whether by the organizations that were mentioned. Therefore, we are receiving an information from the people who were harmed, and it's the civilians. During our meetings, direct meetings with them, they always request the humanitarian sector that they need electricity, they need support for livelihoods. They request treating health conditions, chronic diseases, and other damages that with a continuing impact. We thank the Dutch government and all the donors who worked on helping these affected families, but we would like to convey a message that we want follow-up for these funds, even if the executing bodies are international bodies. Also, there should be some transparency, because the local organizations need to be aware, those who work in these sector. Also, the government bodies, need to be aware of the donations, where these funds are going and where they were implemented. Receiving this information is to clarify for the citizens that we meet continuously that there are some funds that are given in order to alleviate their suffering. But when we don't know where the funds are going, this is a violation for the humanitarian work.
So as a very active member of area-based coordination of Hawija as well as clusters, you have not heard of these funds then? Just to clarify.
لم نسمع.
Okay. And I think when you were describing, you also brought in various elements of accountability on how that accountability to civilians is very important on another level, that even the funding that as humanitarian organizations, whether NGOs or UN agencies, if we're getting them, we also need to be accountable to those funds because we're getting it in the names of the civilians. Ustaz Sabhan, as you were coming here to the Netherlands, and of course you've been representing the people of Havida for over the last 20 years, and you've been elected by them, what expectations did your people have from this visit of yours?
Their expectations in Hawija are an apology from the Dutch government and compensations, direct and indirect compensations. And if you look at the phone, the personal phone of my advisor, you will see the number of messages that were received regarding this subject when they learned about our visit to the Netherlands, and they are relying on us.
Would it be possible for you to share a couple of these stories with us on what people are asking from you?
There is insistence from citizens that were affected because they want compensations for those who were killed or those who were injured, permanently disabled or unemployed because of the injury. Also, some people lost their cars or their factories. They were expecting that we will come back with hands full of compensations. Their simple understanding allows them to know that they don't know that it takes too long to get there. But we hope that the Dutch government will accelerate the action when it comes to this subject. And first and foremost is giving an apology that might alleviate or calm a little bit these victims. شكرا. نظن أن الحوايج لقد تم تحرير الحوايج أكثر من 4 سنوات أو 6 سنوات. لقد مر وقت طويل منذ ذلك. فيما يتعلق بهذه التوقعات التي ذكرتها، كيف تظن أنه يمكن الاستجابة لها بطريقة ذات معنى؟ My expectations are the same as my people. I expect the government to interfere, the Dutch government to interfere. After direct contact with some of the officials from this government, with us as representatives of the province, there should be an ethical engagement of the Dutch government and an official apology and compensations for damages.
Most definitely. Thank you very much for this very open and honest discussion. And as a final remark, what would your key message be from both of you to the Dutch government as well as to the international audience, both present here and watching us on their screens? So what would be your message, if I can start with you?
My message for the international community and the Dutch government, I can summarize it in 3 points. 1, from the international community, reconsidering international and UN organizations and the way they work, the necessity of involving the local government in Hawija and local organizations that are trusted in their work, in the work of international and UN agencies in the city. Second point, we hope that the international community will open new channels with international donors and organizations through PAX to offer services to Hawija for individuals and enterprises. Third point, we hope to compare Hawija to other, or to put any Dutch city in the shoes of Hawija, such as Rotterdam or Nijmegen. Because these cities were also destroyed during the Second World War and they were rebuilt, reconstructed And through this twinning, we can maybe benefit from the experience through cooperation and direct cooperation between the administration in Hawija and the administration in these cities. I also would like to benefit from this opportunity to invite the mayors of these cities to visit Hawija and to see the humanitarian situation and the economic situation so that the image is clearer for the Dutch government. Thank you.
I think you've brought a very important point, so I urge all the audience who's here listening in, present in person or virtually, reach out to your networks. Please connect us with the mayors of these cities so we can make this happen and have that twin city cooperation. I think yesterday in the beginning, Hans also talked about that, when we're talking about accountability, when we're talking about protection of civilians, it needs to be a constructive engagement, and this is a very constructive idea brought forward by the mayor, and I thank him for that. Ustaz Tufan, what would be your message to the Dutch government or the international community listening in?
No.
Of course, the history of the Dutch government and the organizations with the events that took place in a lot of countries, they had a role, an honored role, and which is, this encourages us to request from the international community and the organizations and the donors to support areas that were under ISIS in general, especially the areas where international organizations did not have any reach. That's one thing. And the second, regarding the strike, there are 70 people who were killed. 36 were children, 12 women, and there are 500 injured. Therefore, these people are in dire need for psychological support and the rehabilitation, the reintegration in the society, because there are suicide cases among those who were casualties, and a lot of cases that affect their behavior and led to the disintegration of these families, divorces, separations, because of unemployment resulting from the damage or the destruction that happened. We ask civil society organizations to support these humanitarian cases. That's one aspect. And as civil society organizations, Al-Ghad is ready to provide all the facilitations, the research, the reports that the international organizations need to provide their services. We invite them to visit Al-Hawija and look by themselves and to treat the most important problems in education, in health, in housing, and treating disabilities and health problems. We also hope that the international community, the government, the donors, to support us in the center of cohesion, social cohesion, that was started or founded by PAX, based on the need of the affected people, where this has become a meeting point for these families. Therefore, we request the expansion of this center to increase the number of people working in it according to the specialties, psychological or social specializations, supporting the children programs, helping the victims. And this needs funding. Also, my last message is about the apology. It's actually a very noble act to present an apology. And we value the attempt of the Dutch government in eradicating terrorism, and they were part of the international coalition to exterminate ISIS. But what happened, the mistake that happened, needs to be recognized, and there needs to be an apology which will be a humanitarian message that will help with a lot of psychological cases and to eradicate hatred also among these people who were affected. Finally, we hope from organizations and the government to be preemptive in helping these families that are waiting for us to return to know what will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ustaz Tufan. I also urge any humanitarian organizations who want to work in Hawija to not only go to Hawija through Al-Ghad, but also please feel free to reach out to us, and we can hopefully set up a meeting with Mr. Tufan here in The Hague for the duration of his visit. I now open the floor for questions and answers. I'm going to first start with one question that I have here on the screen, and then I will alternate between in-person audiences and those joining us virtually. So the first question I have from, I'm sorry, I cannot really read the name very clearly, but it says to Ustaz Sabhan. Mr. Mayor, are you aware of the politically appointed commission which is researching the Dutch bombing of Hawija? Have you been contacted by this commission?
I haven't heard of it, and no one contacted me.
Wow, that says quite a bit. And then we have a question from the audience. Ustaz Hassan, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I will speak in Arabic. I have a question to Mr. Subhan. Welcome to him and to Mr. Tufan. Thank you for PAX for talking about such a big project. We have a lot of talk about this big subject, and we have a lot of subjects in Iraq after ISIS. Thank you very much for presenting it in a constructive manner. You talked about the problem and the solution, and you had multiple solutions, so we can choose more than one solution in order to provide something for the victims. But this part is relevant to Mr. Subhan and Tufan. I would like to know, how did you know that this is a Dutch strike, if it's an airstrike, and the Dutch government knew after 4.5 years? So the Dutch government investigated and learned after 4.5 years that this attack happened in Hawija. This is not very clear for me. And the second part was about what Ms. Saba mentioned about the reconstruction. Why did it happen in 6 June 2015 and you didn't tell anyone until now? It's been 6.5 years. I would like to know. I would like to tell Ms. Saba that the war against ISIS ended in 2017. So the military operations happened from 2015 to 2017. The development efforts started in mid-2018. The money started coming in 2018. So they didn't have the chance to talk about this to different parties. There are other cities that were heavily attacked in order to get rid of ISIS. Thank you very much, Dr. Ghassan. Regarding how we knew about the attack, there were some leaks from the operation commands, and it was accurate. And now we know it's accurate because the Dutch government admitted it after 4 years. But why? Why is the government saying that they didn't know? And there's always the discipline of the military that is above everything. How they knew after 4 years? This means that when you hear about this, maybe other ideas come to our mind. Maybe someone was trying to escape the responsibility. And the delay in talking about this program as a local government, we didn't know how we can pursue this legally, internationally, and we talked with a lot of organizations, but Al-Ghad was preemptive about this. And Al-Ghad started with studies and researches about this incident. Then they took the measures that and the course of action started. Thank you. سيد سبحان، هل يمكننا أن أتأكد ما قلته أن الأشخاص أو الناس في الحويجة عرفوا أن الهولنديين كانوا مسؤولين عن هذه الضربة قبل الهولنديين نفسهم، لأن الهولنديين عرفوا بعد 4 سنوات ونصف؟ This is what makes us wonder. Why is the response of the Dutch government like this? This is trying to escape responsibility. Although we look at this government and this kingdom that they have a very noble approach to humanitarian aspects. But regarding this subject, we were a little bit surprised by how it was handled.
No, I think you've raised a very important point in transparency as well and accepting responsibility. We have another question from the audience. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Very nice being here. We're actually with our firm representing some 50 victims from Hawija in court.
Can we repeat the question, please?
Support and underline, of course, the need for compensation. We also know that the Dutch government will not pay compensation in any way because it doesn't feel responsible. It says it was a legitimate military target because it was a military factory used by ISIS. It may instead provide humanitarian assistance, and that's what we're all discussing. The problem, of course, with humanitarian assistance is that you cannot enforce it, and you can enforce compensation, so there's a significant difference there. As far as either way, you will have to know figures and facts. And a concrete question I have and have had since long is that we've been discussing the number of wounded and killed people, and it's not known, it's inaccurate, it's at least 70, maybe more. But from the beginning, we have been told that there are 400 buildings destroyed. And I have been wondering who established this number of 400? How is that an accurate number? And if so, who counted that number? Thank you.
This is a very important question. And as civil society organizations, we look at it from the humanitarian aspect. And the Dutch Air Force and the Dutch Ministry of Defense must have been more accurate or gotten more accurate intelligence information about this warehouse, which contained highly explosive substances. So they should have checked whether there were civilians surrounding this warehouse. Because normal people and simple citizens know that ISIS or Daesh used civilians as human shields. And they compelled families to stay in these areas so the coalition would not shell or bomb their headquarters and their points. So the numbers of these victims, or the counting of the numbers of the victim, was a mistake. There was a mistake in the counting, and we have to pay attention also now to the struggle of these people. And concerning the denial, as a citizen myself, and as a representative of my people, especially in the area of Hawija, so these people are conscious and sure that the Dutch people who uphold the humanitarian issue are compassionate with them. They feel with them in the diagnosis of this mistake. Therefore, the compensation, so if the compensation is linked to the recognition of this mistake, then I think that the humanitarian aspect is more noble, is higher than what happened. Second, when it comes to the assistance, to the aid, this should not be linked to the compensations. So there are needs, there are general needs. There are health facilities and hospitals that were destroyed. Schools were destroyed. Water networks were destroyed. And this led to the death of lots of children because of low-quality drinking water. There are numerous cases of children who now work in jobs. So these jobs violate all humanitarian values. And some of these children were exploited with illegal jobs, illegal works, and inhumane works that were a result of the strike. And therefore, so there should be a treating, that we should treat this problem. And as civil society, we are calling for the treating and the rectification of the repercussion of this strike.
Ustaz Sabhan, would you also like to comment on this question or respond to this question?
Mr. Tofan said enough about it, but I would like to add a few simple things. So when the Dutch government does not commit to the compensations because this has become something compelling, so where is the humanitarian value in this? Because there's a struggle on the level of individuals and there's a struggle on the institutional level also, on the level of institutions. So when we deal with the struggle on the level of institutions, which is the defect in electricity networks, sewage networks, sanitation networks, water networks, the destruction of a number of schools. In addition, lots of teachers and students find it difficult to go back to Hawija and resume their lives because of the destruction of their houses. So all these can be easy and simple when we compare them to the individual struggle of the people, because the human being is at the center of this issue here. So the human being has to be the axis of the work of humanitarian organizations. because the individual struggle is very high. Some people lost their breadwinners because their death or they become disabled. Some people lost their houses and live outside now. They become homeless and they don't have the means to rebuild the house. Some people lost their livelihoods. There were also the suicide cases, cancer cases. There are a high number of cancer incidences. There are also like congenital and congenital problems because that resulted from this explosion, from this strike, or birth defects. So this individual struggle have to be on top, and the priority of the work of humanitarian organizations. Because any compensation on the institutional level, on the level of the institutions, will not alleviate any of the individual struggles and suffering. Thank you.
I think you've accurately described that 70 civilians is possibly just what we see on the surface, but it is far bigger problem underneath it. And you're also accurately describing how 6.5 years later, your people are still suffering from the aftermath of the airstrike, and that it's far beyond that 70, the number 70. Just to also share with you what we got from the civilians, and because people also want something tangible, but both gentlemen have done a very good job in humanizing everything. From the conversations we've had, within the industrial district alone, 20 car showrooms were destroyed. The electricity substation was destroyed. The civil defense department with their 12 vehicles were destroyed. The municipality department was completely destroyed. 5 ice factories were completely destroyed. 1 flour mill, 1 textile mill completely destroyed. 3 brick factories, a petrol station or a gas station, and at least 2,000 persons lost their jobs, and at least 1,200 businesses and shops were completely flattened. This is just to put that 70 civilians is just a very tiny thing that is being portrayed in the media. We have a question from Dr. Yola Demers, please.
Thank you, Saba. And many thanks to both of you for coming to the Netherlands to explain the reverberating effects that people feel up until today of this airstrike. I want to take us back to June 2015 and the years after, because what I think the larger public has still trouble grasping is that this attack happened, but it took 2 more years for Hawija to be liberated from ISIS. So to have an airstrike, to make use of Air Force on rebel-held territories and urban settings, of course, has this implication that people, citizens, continue to live under rebel rule while having this massive destruction put upon them. So could you inform perhaps also the larger public a bit more on what this meant to citizens to be both attacked by this bombing and having to live with all the consequences while ISIS was still holding power? How did that play out in terms of access to health, access to resources, and reconstruction in the period between 2015 and 2017, 2015 and 2017?
There were no services at all during this period of time. So for those who were inside Hawija, were there and compelled to stay there by ISIS. So people were coming to Hawija in order to cross to Kirkuk as a safe area. So ISIS was not providing any services. In addition, so from 2015 until 2017, hundreds of children lost their lives. There were hundreds of patients, people who fell ill. There were hundreds of elderly people who were sick. There were thousands also who, up until now, after the liberation, were still suffering the repercussions of this dark era that affected their lives. So there were lots of diseases, such as diabetes, blood pressure, and other chronic diseases that resulted from this period. and still need treatment. So this criminal organization as ISIS, they were only giving health care to their members and those who support them. But for the general people, the people who were forced to stay by force, so they stayed by force, because ISIS had planted the borders between their area and the area of the government. So they planted them with IEDs, and they were killing everyone who was trying to escape. So up until now, these families are still struggling and suffering, especially children. They are suffering from psychological issues that are very difficult and very dangerous. And I will give you a very quick example. After the liberation, directly after the liberation, when we went back and met the children who were there, we did not see the innocence of children. We did not see the innocence in their faces, because ISIS taught them violence. They took them into training camps. They took them to training in special schools. So, and they taught them to be the boys of heaven. So they showed them how to slaughter people. So they had to witness people being slaughtered. So this is how they seeded violence inside these people. And when we established the psychosocial support center to help these people, these children, we gave them papers to draw. So they only drew scenes of slaughtering people and violence scenes. So this is my answer to you. So between 2015 and 2017 has left us with repercussions that up until now we are still paying the price of these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important that you've also shared that ISIS was preventing people from actually escaping Havida. It was besieged and there were IEDs all over, because we often get this question that why did they continue living under ISIS? I think it's very important that you've made it very clear here. I have another question here from the online audience. It's asking for Mr. Sabhan, have the people of Hawija faced any discrimination from the Iraqi government or the Dutch government due to ISIS presence in Hawija, or like former ISIS presence in Hawija, of course?
Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, that if the people of Hawija, for instance, are being discriminated against by either the Iraqi government or the Dutch government simply because ISIS used to occupy that region before?
The Iraqi government only differentiates or discriminates against the ISIS fighters. And the federal government also talked about the importance of the return of the ISIS families, like the women and children who can be innocent. So the discrimination was only against ISIS fighters only. And when we communicated with some entities in the Dutch government about this strike, and when the Dutch consul asked some question about it, one of the conditions was not mentioning ISIS victims. And this is logical, because when compensation requests are submitted, the security apparatus investigates these requests. So ISIS fighters exclusively are not supported by the government and not supported by any international organization. So I mean that the discrimination is only against ISIS fighters. Their families are not discriminated against. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question that's asking, how should the government of Netherlands engage directly with the people in Hawija to explain their perspective? Like, how should the Dutch government explain their own perspective to the civilians of Hawija? And second, has the Dutch embassy in Iraq ever visited Hawija or talked to the civilians there?
There were numerous delegations from the federal government who visited Hawija after its liberation. And to acknowledge or to see what the situation is, they tried also to encourage people to return and to coexist peacefully.
But this was the Iraqi government, not the Dutch government.
There was no communication except for the communication that happened with the Dutch consul in Iraq. And he only wanted to ask some details about the incident, and that's it. Thank you.
But nobody from the Dutch government has visited Hawija.
Never.
And how would you, in your opinion, how should the Dutch government engage with civilians on the ground in Hawija in a meaningful way?
This was part of my message to the international community and to the Dutch government. So the first thing is an apology, and Dutch officials can visit the area. Concerning the provision of assistance or aid, this can be through Dutch government committees that can provide assistance directly, or through trusted or credible organizations that we can deal with through PAX. And that is because there are numerous organizations that are not transparent. And unfortunately, these organizations were United Nations organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions from the audience, perhaps, before I take a question from our virtual audience? I will then move to the virtual audience. So another question, that what can be learned from other accountability processes in Iraq? For instance, do mayors within Iraq also consult each other, especially mayors who've dealt with civilian harm? Are you in touch with any other mayors in Iraq?
So I communicate with mayors in the Kirkuk governorate and mayors from other governorates, but they are all suffering approximately from the same problem. Compensations are coming slow because the Iraqi government has the heavy burden of dealing with terrorism. The Iraqi government is giving importance to this issue, and they have established public official institutions to deal with this issue. However, the burden of fighting terrorism and the global financial crisis also, and the COVID-19 circumstances, so all these delay the compensations reaching the civilians. Knowing that these compensations are urgent and cannot be delayed.
And these compensations are by the Iraqi government, not by any other government?
Yes, these are from the Iraqi government, but the numerous burdens on the Iraqi government are delaying these compensations. نعم بالطبع. هل من أسئلة أخرى؟ I would like to add to what Mr. Sabhan said. The coalition forces that include more than 33 countries, as far as I think, so this coalition had bombed lots of other areas in Iraq, such as Fallujah and Anbar and Ramadi, along with other areas in Mosul and Salahuddin. But as civil society organizations, and as an organization working in Anbar, Salahuddin, Kirkuk, and Mosul, and through our field visits, we found that there's a large interference from the countries belonging to the coalition, and they are providing funds for rebuilding and rehabilitation, especially because of the damage or the destruction caused by their airplanes or their air force. And what we see now in Anbar, we see that there's a prosperity in Anbar and a normal life has returned in Anbar. So all this is due to civil society organizations and due to the support of international governments that were a cause in the destruction of some of the important sectors of the society because they were bombing ISIS. So my vision here is what happened, happened. Now we need to deal with the problem, especially with the humanitarian problem. There are children whose eyes, who lost their eyes. There are women who lost their hands and their feet or their legs. There are psychological cases that led to lots of suicide cases. So the civil or the international community and the coalition forces who contributed to the shelling have to treat the repercussions of their acts. Thank you.
I think you've brought a very significant point. They need to be held accountable. They need to pay for the repercussions, but they also need to accept and apologize, which is very important. Did the people of, another question that we have from the online audience, did the people of Hawija know that there was an IED factory in that area, in the industrial neighborhood?
The people in Hawija do not know all the details of the work or activities of ISIS. However, ISIS was working in a sneaky way. They were trying to exploit the civilians and use them as human shields. ISIS was using people as human shields in order to protect their points or their headquarters. Therefore, civilians did not have a choice in the location where they live, because when the families were trying to seek refuge in the villages away from airstrikes, ISIS was obliging them to stay in these areas in the city. Moreover, these families did not know that there was a large weapons and explosives, highly explosive substances warehouse in this location. I am telling you this based on the meetings that we held with 119 families. So we asked these questions to these families.
We have another question from the audience.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question with regard to the different narratives. Sometimes the perspective here in the Netherlands is a little bit different than from on the ground. And I just want to come back to one of the issues that were touched upon before. And this is that in the letter that the minister wrote to the parliament with regard to the spending of the over $4 million, there is explicit mention that the money will be spent in close consultation with the community. Am I right in understanding that both the mayor as well as Mr. Tofan, a representative of civil society, both are not consulted? And if they are not, do they know what the minister means if he says that he is spending the money in close consultation with the local community?
Okay.
I don't know if the minister knows or doesn't know about this, but I personally don't know about this. I don't know if these funds were allocated or spent or not, because I don't see anything that happened on the ground. وحضرتك أنت السلطة في الحويجة. We are here speaking in the language of the citizens. We are conveying the voice of the citizens. I would hope that the special report produced by Al-Ghad would have been shown, and you would have been the interviews with the people would have been shown. So this way, you will get answers to lots of your questions only by listening to these people who were interviewed. We are saying, Mr. Minister, please review the auditing of the spending of this money, which is the money of the Dutch people and not your own money. Therefore, this money or these funds, they were allocated for humanitarian cause and to treat humanitarian issues. However, it is as if you gave a piece of ice, a large piece of ice, that the citizen only received one droplet of. So it melted on the way. This is my answer.
I think it's very important that you've brought this up, that the trickle-down effect is hardly anything. Another question from the audience, and maybe this can be the last question, and then we will wrap up this discussion. And I encourage especially the in-person audience to continue engaging with our speakers during the break. Yes, please.
Thanks. I'm honored to have the last question. So both for the mayor and for the director. I was wondering if we go back to sort of the first days after the bombing in 2015. So imagine if we put ourselves in the position of the coalition, but also the Dutch government, realizing that we've done an incredible amount of damage in a situation like this. What, looking back, would you say are the lessons we should draw from that? So what should a coalition like that or a government like that do different next time? What are the things that where did we go wrong in the days immediately after after it happened in 2015? Thank you.
So this was a military operation. And the military know their laws and their discipline. It would have been very easy for them to know what is actually in the incident location. Concerning the solution, so maybe they could have chosen different targets. And if they had received very accurate information, what was attacked was not a fixed target. It was a mobile target that was moving. So when they get military information, so when they get information about the mobile target, they should have targeted it before it reached an area that is a residential area or where there are civilians. I think that this is not difficult for them to do. So what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the war, so there were repercussions of this work, there was of this war, there were a humanitarian struggle and suffering, and there were lots of victims. But there was a humanitarian action regarding this from the international community and from the countries who participated in the war that has happened there. So today, we are calling upon the countries who came to help Iraq to rid us of ISIS. So now we are telling them to continue, or asking them to continue in their humanitarian cause and to help the victims that they made victims. ISIS destroyed, ISIS killed people, and ISIS is a terrorist or is a criminal organization. But you are countries who uphold the humanitarian values in the world. Therefore, we are surprised by you keeping silent about these victims and these cases. This is why we are hopeful, and our people are hopeful, and they are waiting for us. So we hope that there would be pressure exerted by the Dutch people and by civil society organizations or international civil society organizations. So this pressure should be exerted on the government and on the parliament to recognize this attack and to work on helping the affected people.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very important point that in conclusion that you've raised. ISIS was a terrorist organization. The people that have been affected by the coalition, their needs need to be addressed before another such catastrophe happens again. Again, I would like to thank you very much that you've trusted us with all this information. You've trusted us with the stories. The 119 civilians trusted us with making sure that their message comes across. We are forever grateful, and we are extremely happy that you accepted our invitation and shared this very openly and honestly with the audience. I cannot express my gratitude enough. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a break for about half an hour. At 11:30, we will start the next session where the research that PAX University of Utrecht and Al-Ghad have conducted, we will be discussing some of the findings then. I encourage our virtual participants to get a coffee, stretch their legs, but also look at the networking area, and the in-person audience, grab a cup of coffee, and maybe if we can be back in about 25 minutes. Thank you very much, everybody.